Drop D tuning has to be the most popular of the so-called alternative tunings, and if you want to get into alternative tunings, something like open D and open G, which are fantastically versatile in certain styles, then think of drop D as a kind of gateway tuning to that. Start to get to grips with drop D and you'll find other things will fall into place. And it revolves around the idea that if you play it in standard tuning, a plain old D chord like this, then the lowest D on the guitar is the open fourth string. It doesn't really stand a chance compared to something like an E minor, where you've got these grand acoustic 6 strings resonating there, or a G, again a 6-string chord. If you're playing in the key of G, you can always bash that out with 6 strings and it feels really bassy and substantial. Even something like a C, where at least you're extending the chord down to the 5th string, or A, obviously. D stands alone as this slightly weedy sound that we have, and if you're playing in the key of D, that can be a bit of an issue. So what we can easily do is retune the bottom string. We're going to drop it, hence the name of the tuning, to D. Now you'll find that the bottom string needs to be an octave below the open 4th string. Use your tuner or just hear it. You can, of course, if you know how to play harmonics, play a 12th fret harmonic on the open 6th string, and that should be exactly the same as the open 4th string. You can finger at the 12th fret, depending on how well your guitar is set up. Again, that should give you exactly the same note as the open 4th string. So, here we are. Let's look at a few common chord shapes that you're likely to play in the key of D. And right away, I want to say that if you're planning on using exotic chords, lots of diminished chords, or things that really aren't very close to the key, like you're in D and you suddenly want to play a B flat major 7 or an E flat augmented or something like that, then maybe drop D isn't the place for you. But if you're sticking to the chords that are commonly found in this key, which are things like D, obviously, G, A, E minor, B minor, that kind of thing, maybe even C, then drop D is really worth a look. So let's compare a few common chords. Obviously, D is now a 6-string chord, and there we have it. D minor, likewise. Okay, that's really useful, being able to extend your D or D minor chord down to the bottom string. And of course, the 5th string comes along for the ride. That's an A. So that's optionally part of the chord. So if you're playing a 4-string D, you could include the A, and now of course you're really going to have to, and that's going to add to the richness of the sound. Of course, if you've got a chord that normally doesn't use 6 strings, like a C, or an A minor, or an A7, of course nothing's going to change, because we're not using the 6th string, so the tuning doesn't make any difference. But if we're using a chord that normally would use the 6th string, like an E minor, that's not an E minor anymore, because we've tuned the bottom E down to bottom D, which is the equivalent of 2 frets worth. So what do? Well, you've got a couple of options. You can either just leave the bottom string out. It doesn't really give us an E in the bass, that's an E minor over B now. So if we want to include the 6th string, we're going to need to compensate for the fact that effectively we've tuned the bottom string down the equivalent of 2 frets by fingering it 2 frets higher than we would do in standard tuning. So we're going to add 2 frets to bring it back to an E. So now that's an E minor, perfectly standard E minor. And if you're playing in the key of D and an E minor comes up, that's what you're going to do. The other common chord that uses the bottom string is the G chord. And of course, if I play a G here, that's no good to anyone. That's not a G. That would have been a G in standard tuning, but it's been tuned down 2 frets, so that comes out as an F. In fact, a G is here. Now, before you start trying to form a G like this is the way that you'd normally play G in drop D tuning. Okay, there are a few variations on that, but this is the basic one. I'm bringing my 3rd finger down to the 5th fret, which is now a G, and my 1st finger's up on the top string. My 3rd finger is just kind of muting the 5th string as well. I'm just taking it out of circulation. Now you could add other strings, that kind of thing, or maybe you don't want to do it like that. But the standard way of playing G in drop D tuning is like this. That's the one that you're going to really want to get to grips with. In my Guitar Song Essentials series, I've got various songs in drop D tuning, including John Denver's Annie's Song, John Martin's May You Never. I've also got A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall by Bob Dylan. And there, he doesn't play G this way. He actually plays it like this. This is quite a common way to play G. He just misses out the 6th string. In fact, because he's strumming, he'll often catch that string. So we've got a G over B if we don't include the bottom string. And if we do, well, then it's a G over D. But in the context of the song, it works perfectly well. There's no need to go to the extra fuss of including that bottom G there, because we get the idea. Now, having the 6th string tuned an octave below the 4th string means that fingerpicking in certain styles becomes really easy, because you're just alternating the 6 and 4 with the thumb like this. The 5th string being A, along with those 2 Ds, that creates a really thick kind of drone. So again, if you're in D or D minor and you're familiar with these little top string shapes like this, you can leave these open strings to rumble on underneath. Pretty useful for rhythm work in particular styles. And using a capo isn't especially difficult in this key. You're going to use the same shapes you were using without a capo. You just got to think higher. For instance, Hard Rain's Gonna Fall by Dylan is in drop D with a capo on the 2nd fret. Oh, where have you been, my blue-eyed son? Oh, where have you been, my darling young one? He makes use of those little top string triadic shapes too. I was watching Bonnie Raitt playing John Pryan's Angel from Montgomery the other day. One of my students had said, oh, she plays this. And we were working out what key it was in, and actually she's playing in E, but I noticed she's got a capo on the 2nd fret. I was thinking, that's odd, but of course she's just doing this. She's in drop D too. So there's an example of someone who's choosing to play actually in the key of E, but use drop D tuning with a capo on the 2nd fret. It effectively means the same thing. And just before we finish, here's an idea that you can try. We've dropped the bottom string, the equivalent of 2 frets worth. So if you're putting a capo on the 2nd fret, what you're really doing is raising the pitch of all the other strings by 2 frets and returning the 6th string to the original pitch. And if you've got a capo like this one that allows you to put the capo across only certain strings, try this. I returned my 6th string to an E, and now I'm going to put my capo just across the top 5 strings. But with the capo on the 2nd fret and the 6th string in standard tuning, I get exactly the same result as if I tuned the bottom string down to D, so a drop D tuning with a capo across all 6 strings. Where have you been, my blue-eyed son? Where have you been, my darling young one? For instance. Okay, so So I just want to be clear, my sixth string is now in E, in standard tuning, but my capo is across only the top 5 strings, so it's kind of like a drop E or something. but here's the good bit. Now, that's my G. My G is in standard tuning, effectively, and I can play a normal G chord this way. Oh, where have you been, my blue-eyed son? Okay, so that's effectively drop D without being in drop D by using a capo on the 2nd fret. And of course, there's nothing to stop you repeating this trick further up the neck. If I put my capo across the top 5 strings on the 5th fret, then put this capo behind it, this is really just for the 6th string, on the 3rd fret, that's equivalent to having drop D with a capo on the 5th fret. So for instance, Here Comes the Sun, I think that's not in drop D tuning, but you could play it in drop D, but the capo would normally be across the 7th fret. There you go. So that's a kind of a wheeze or a workaround if you didn't want to retune your guitar but still wanted to get the full effect of drop D. Just have a capo across the top 5 strings 2 frets higher than the 6th string. There you go, drop D tuning.